Well, cool. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
I'm so excited to be here.
I have been a fan of the financial diet for quite a few years, a subscriber, a frequent listener. I just think you're doing something really cool and unique and necessary for young women, young men, everybody who tunes into you. I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. Our audience is, I would say, like 85 to 90% women, but there are a couple of men. So thank you for shouting them out.
Sure. No, I wondered. I was curious what kind of that breakdown looked like. So it's mostly women.
By far. Yeah.
Wow. What do you think that is?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, my co-founder and I are both women. Our staff is entirely women. So I think it's natural that the content that we create is going to resonate more with women. But I think it's also kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. Like as more women make up our audience, we are going to obviously cater to them more with our content and so on and so forth. But honestly, like I'm very happy with the demographic breakdown we have. Like, I don't feel a need to pursue men because honestly, they're already very well spoken to by the traditional finance media community.
Amen. I feel like that's when I first started getting into personal finance, everything that I saw was just like men talking. And I was like, where are the women saying things? So it's really cool that you do kind of skew more toward women. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I definitely agree.
I want to talk with you today about personal finance and then more specifically kind of the emotions behind our relationship to money and how those emotions can impact our behaviors with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Can you give kind of the rundown just for listeners who might not know of what the financial diet is, when it started?
Yep. So we're a media company. That means we do all kinds of media, articles, newsletter, videos, podcasts, events. My co-founder and I started it back in 2014. I actually started it as my own personal blog because I just wanted to hold myself accountable to getting good with money. And she was an art director at an ad agency who was very bored at her job. So she reached out and she was like, let me design this as a project for my portfolio. Really early on, we got noticed by John and Hank Green, who are very prominent YouTubers, authors, that kind of stuff. And they have a foundation where they just grant money to internet projects that they want to support. And so they gave us a small grant, which gave us the initiative to quit our jobs and start it as a real company, getting, an LLC going. My former colleague at my previous job, we worked at another media company together. She joined on after about a year or so part-time as a third partner and has just kind of snowballed ever since. And now we're a staff of 12 women based out of our office in Manhattan.
All women?
All women.
Wow. Oh, that's phenomenal.
All ladies. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I was talking the other day to my colleague about this. Like, I almost never interact with men now. Like, I have my husband and I have a few friends and like my friends' husbands, but outside of that, I just almost never interact with men.
Interesting. Is it a particular culture that you're trying to kind of cultivate?
I mean, I think so. Most of our staff come from more traditional media backgrounds. Okay. Where women are usually in the minority and they're usually paid worse and they're usually treated worse and expected to pick up slack, and things like, maternity leave are a complete afterthought. Like, it sounds stupid, but even, just a simple thing of like in our bathroom at the office, there's like a whole medicine cabinet of like tampons and Midol and makeup and dry shampoo and all of that stuff that almost feel like ashamed of having in a more traditional office. And I think that culture is really, really nice. Now, we're not opposed to ever hiring a man, but he would have to be like an absolute zero on the toxic masculinity scale for sure.
I love that requirement. That's great. I want to get into kind of how you started the company and what that looked like for you initially of what that first, note of inspiration was. But first, I want to kind of backtrack to your childhood and what your relationship with money was like then, what your family's relationship with money was like, because I firmly believe that our relationships with money are started when we're young, and we either have to kind of course correct when we're older, or, maybe we had a great relationship with money when we were young because of what our family's financial situation was. And so it's less work once you get older, but I definitely think it's instrumental in our relationship to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm very transparent about it in my books and on TFD. My family was in, I don't know if we were below the poverty line, but if we weren't, we were very close to it. When I was a young kid living in North Carolina, I was an only child till I was 7 too, which I think made me feel even closer to that kind of lack of money, because I think when you're an only child, you are just, I think, more in proximity with adults from a young age. And as I grew up, got older, around maybe end of elementary school, beginning of middle school, we moved to another town, Annapolis, Maryland, which many people are probably not familiar with, but if you are familiar with it, you know that it's like very wealthy, very like waspy. It's a sailing community. Like the Naval Academy is there. It's like kind of like Nantucket energy. And by that time, my family had gotten more financially stable. Like my sister and I talk a lot about the fact that she had a very different experience growing up than I did, because my family just had more money as she was around. So by the time I was in high school in that town, we were probably lower middle class, but still, you know, financially stable middle class. But I was going to school with kids who were like, you know, getting a brand new BMW for, you know, their 16th birthday, or, you know, like I knew an insane amount of people who had boats, like their own boats. The number of people I know who got a BUI in that town is out of control. But yeah, so I think when you are weirdly, and I do talk about this, I think especially in the TFD book, like when I was poor in Charlotte, North Carolina, we lived in a very poor neighborhood and everyone was poor. And so like the kids, like I felt very aware of my parents' situation and I knew that they didn't have a lot, but because everyone around me was at the same level, like there was no shame about it. And like, we all knew, like, we didn't get to go to restaurants. We didn't get to like have a lot of new things. Playing was just like sticks and mud in the backyard. But at least that was the expectation. So you never felt like you were the poor kid. When I was in high school and after high school, like I was the poor kid. And so I always, even though we had more money at that point in my life, I felt way poorer. I felt way more embarrassed and insecure. And I worked, like part-time jobs and then full-time during the summer, nannying, everything I could do from the age of 13 onward. By the time I graduated high school, my parents made me put 75% of every paycheck I got into the savings account that I only got access to when I turned 18. I turned 18, I got the account. I think there was like $12,000 in it. I spent it all within a couple of weeks and I don't even remember what I spent it on.
Whoa.
I also got a credit card and defaulted on it, ruined my credit. So like, basically, I was in a position where I was so consumed with shame and envy and, you know, like insecurity about it that I just had a completely irresponsible relationship with money because all I wanted to do was spend it to feel a certain way. And so that experience, and especially the dichotomy between those two, really taught me that it's not, yes, everyone needs a baseline in order to be stable and to build a solid life. But beyond that, what makes the biggest difference is what you're surrounding yourself by and what the expectations are of people around you is what will dictate how you feel.
100%. The community aspect really speaks to me. I supported my family through my acting career from age 11 on. And I understood that my success was going to help my family. My mom put me in acting when I was 6, and it was made clear to me that like, you're the ticket out, you're going to help our family. You're going to be the thing that you're our only chance, was sort of the messaging that I was told. And so then to have that kind of messaging at age 6, it was always like, oh, I have to find a way to make things work for my entire family. So then it was not only the shame that I felt in my environment, but also being responsible for everybody else. I think it just stacks up and just becomes, I mean, at a certain point, I think it demands to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to know from you, when was that point where you said, where you felt like it was time to acknowledge it, where you went, you know what? Okay, there's been a situation with the credit cards. I spent the money. Like, was that something that you were realizing as you were doing it? Were you almost kind of aware in the moment, or did it take years, you know, or months, or however long it took to kind of come to terms with that?
So I ruined my credit at 18 and basically spent 18 to 22 just like trying to outrun my own problems, like using check cashing services and buying like unimaginably bad beater cars in cash and like living basically under the table because I was like defaulted everywhere and overdrafted everywhere. So I had like no credibility with anything. And at 22, I had started my writing career at 21, and I like got enough traction with it that by 22, I got my, or 23, somewhere in there, I got my first book deal, 23, I think. And it was for $22,000. Yeah, I mean, you know, $22,000. Now I could go on for an entire hour just about the complete bullshit that is the publishing industry and how all that works. But suffice to say, although $22,000 is nothing when you break down what it actually takes to make a book and to market a book, it was a ton for me, right, at the time. And it was enough that I could pay off my defaulted cards. I could like get out of, you know, the really, really bad pressing situations that were leading me. Like I didn't pick up my phone for 4 years because every other person was going to be a debt collector. So it allowed me to get out of that like extreme, just like Mayday situation. And I always like, I got it in my head that if I always had $1,000 in the bank, I was okay, which I was completely arbitrary and totally not how that works. But then by 25, I got my first staff job. It paid $36,000 a year, which in New York is unlivable basically. But it was the first time I had like a regular salary that was going in my account automatically every 2 weeks. And I was like, clearly you have all the ingredients now to be ahead of yourself financially, and to not be living this way like you did at 18 when you didn't have any of these resources. So that's when I started TFD as just like a Tumblr to track my progress.
So that first book was not anything related to TFD?
No.
Is it something, are you proud of that book? Is it something that you...
I mean, it's very much of the time. Like I always would describe it as an Urban Outfitters book. Like it was not like, it's not like a literary work. But you know, in general, I kind of think like, I think people often, especially people who create anything for public consumption, and I'm sure you could probably relate to this to some extent. Like, I think it's so easy to look back at things that you did before and feel like, ooh, you know, or feel embarrassed or feel like, you know,
literally
or like
everything before age 25. Everything. I'm like, why did that exist?
100%. But I do feel like, and especially the worst is when like, it's certain things you're like, I hope that is not that person's like entree into me. Like, I hope they see something else.
Yes.
But I do think it's like one thing I think is important to really sort of embrace from just a mental health perspective is to not only just be really empathetic to your former self, but to also understand like how impressive and how like unimaginable your life today would seem to that person. You know, that person was in such a different place, and the life that you're living now, the taste and discernment that you have now for the kind of work that you do, or the way you go about your life is like, that would be so aspirational and unimaginable to that person. So you have to relate to them on the level of the life they were living at that time. So for the life I was living at that time, that was a great book, and I'm proud of my former self for doing it.
That's so well said, so beautiful. And I would love your tips/tricks on how to extend that empathy to your former self, because that is something I struggle with. Genuinely, like I cannot get, I feel like there's this part of my past, this shame that I feel in my past that is probably the thing. I've overcome things significantly larger than that, I feel emotionally. And yet that's the thing that kind of haunts me. It's like, I wish that I could just undo my past, and I can't. And living with it is a thing that I struggle with.
I mean, for you, it's particularly hard, right? Like you exist in a lot of people's minds as your former self, right? Like a lot of people, like that's their image of you. And I feel like one thing that's just unnatural for human brains, although I think it's starting to happen to everyone via social media. Like it used to be only like famous people would experience this, but with social media, I feel like people are much too aware of their past selves, and other people have way too much access to each other's past selves and to their own past selves. Like we can see, especially like, you know, I'm 32, and back when, you know, Facebook was first a thing for us, like we made a photo album, a full 50 photo album of every time we went to a club or whatever. Like there's just so much of your former self available to you. And that's not natural, because ultimately like that person is just like, it's an illusion. Like that doesn't exist anymore, and it shouldn't have that much weight. But when other people not only have access to your former self to that extent, but also that is their current image of you, like that's, I mean, a lot of work to get over that.
Yep. I will be working on it for years to come. I want to talk about the financial diet and how that started for you. Was it like you saw a space in the market where, to your point earlier, maybe this is kind of a male skewing thing. Why are there not many women talking about personal finance? Or was it just something that you'd had the desire to do for a while? What was that first seed like for you?
It was, our third partner and myself, not my co-founder, but our third partner who joined on, we had both worked at another media company, and we worked on the brand side where we did, basically sponsored content. Like we did brand deals, okay. We worked on them. So I understood from a really early time in my media life, like how media makes money, which I think a lot of people who work in media on the talent side, whether you're a writer or an actor or a musician, you're often very removed from the finances of that media. And you have a very yes. And intentionally so.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you bring it up. I just feel like the talent is almost sheltered from that side of things. So the biggest sort of in that you have to that conversation is when your attorney calls you and tells you like that a deal's closing and you're like, oh, cool, I guess. Like you don't really have 100%. Right.
Yeah. And the talent being in the dark is of huge advantage to the business, to, all of the lawyers and managers and, executives and vultures who are going to be making a lot of money off of these people. But, so that because we had that familiarity with how media makes money, we knew that the type of content we were going to be making, like it's just the bottom line is that financial content is uniquely easy to monetize from a sponsorship perspective, which is how most media companies like TV, it's the commercials you see, magazines, it's the advertisements. Like that's how media makes money for the most part. Mm-hmm. And financial content is very easy to monetize. Like all of the financial services brands want to work with companies like ours, and they have a shit ton of money. So we knew that it was going to be an easy thing to monetize, and we knew how to monetize it. And so that was what brought on the impetus to make it a real full-fledged business. But the impetus to create the content started from a very genuine place, which was that I felt that there were at the time basically no financial media outlets or personalities who talked about money in a way that felt interesting or relatable to me. So I wanted to create that.
How would you describe your relationship to money now?
Good, because I have it. When you have money, it's not difficult to have a good relationship with money. Now, there are a lot of people who have money and have a bad relationship to it, but you don't need to. Like that ultimately is like a question for like you and your therapist, right? Because if you have money and you have a bad relationship to it, or you can't keep it or something like that, it usually boils down to things like you're addicted to spending, or you're, irresponsible with long-term planning, or like something that is just, a problem to be solved. And most of our audience has enough money that like they can get good with money and they can create a good relationship with it. But when you don't have money, it's nearly impossible to have a good relationship with it, because it is such a source of fear and shame and anxiety and pressure. So I always like to say that, like, yes, I do feel that on a sort of emotional, holistic level, I do have a good relationship to money now. But ultimately, what that really comes down to is the fact that I don't have to worry about money. And again, there are people who worry about money who have it, but mostly it's just a question of getting out of their own way, doing things like automating bill payments and automating savings and, setting up your investment portfolio to just run in the background, and like all of those things that, take a little bit of time up front, but are not difficult to do. And we do teach people how to do that. But once you have money, not having a good relationship with it is pretty much voluntary.
I'm curious, sort of those people out there, I'm sure there are listeners who are in that sort of section of people that you're describing that do feel hopeless, that don't feel like they just can't get one foot in front of the other with money. They just don't have enough of it. They're just plugging away. Everything's behind. Bills are always late. I'm thinking of my parents and witnessing them growing up and how stressful that was and how money was such a source of shame and fear. What advice would you give to somebody like that who's just thinking, well, God, I feel like I could potentially have a good relationship with money if I had enough of it. What steps can they take to even try and get there?
So it depends on what their situation is, but a couple of things. Number one is to look for free resources in your area for financial counseling. And that can be both on a therapeutic and also like a CFP, like strictly financial planning level. But a lot of local and state governments and different charitable organizations all across the country offer that kind of counseling pro bono for people who need it. So definitely start there. Speaking with someone about your problems or what's, kind of an obstacle for you is always definitely, I think, a really important first step. Second would be start having a really open conversation with as many people in your life as you feel comfortable doing it with. I think a lot of what keeps people in a really terrible situation financially is they feel that they can't talk about it. They feel that they can't be honest about being on a budget or not being able to afford something. They feel that they need to spend a certain way in order to maintain relationships or in order to not push people away or what have you. So getting really honest and very comfortable with saying, it's not in my budget. I'm on a really strict budget right now. I'm, trying to get my financials in order. So I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And, we really recommend at least a buddy system, finding one other person in your life who's also looking to improve their finances and creating just like a group text. But ideally you want to spread it to a couple people, have some group chats going, join subreddits, Facebook groups, like things for people who are also looking to improve or change their relationship with money. And then thirdly is if you are someone who is perpetually behind the 8 ball, make a commitment to yourself, like however small it needs to be that you can actually do it. It can be $10 a month. It doesn't matter. Create a budget because everyone has a budget. Most people just don't know what their budget is, but everyone has a budget. But like actually take the time to write out your budget, analyze it. It doesn't matter if you're hemorrhaging money every month. Know the exact details of your budget and take that goal and say, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to save $10 every month. Do that for a couple of months. Get used to the feeling of knowing exactly what's going on with your money and exercising some level of control and agency over it, because that is the feeling that you have to break, is that feeling like I'm out of control. It's overwhelming. We have so many people who talk about, I don't ever check my statements. I don't ever look at my cards. Like I'm in so much debt. I don't even know how much debt I'm in. And you feel like it's this overwhelming thing that it's so overwhelming that why even try? But the feeling of being in control of your money and making progress is addictive, and it becomes a snowball effect. And it is scientifically proven that people who pay very close attention to their money, even if they don't have any more income, they will save more because you become much more conscientious about every purchase.
100%. Were any of these tools that you used when you were in a different place in your life?
All of them. All of them.
And so you had a past self that was overwhelmed and felt that out of control and that state of like absolute hopelessness. You've been there.
Oh, please. When I tell you, like, it is so like past a certain point, like one of my favorite things to say about money, and I can't even, I don't know who said this, but someone said it was like, being good with money is not hard. It's like, you have to learn a couple of things and do a couple of things. But past that, it's just like very passive, and it's all about just like having enough money. And often just like getting that income is the difficult part. But once you are at a certain place with money, and a lot of our audience is this way, like you've got your budget set up, you've got your credit score, being worked on, you've got your investments rolling for retirement, like you do the basics.
Yeah.
Past that point, most of it becomes a mental health issue. And most of it becomes like your relationship to money, your relationship to consumerism, your prenups, you're like, how do you deal with it with your partners, with your friends, with your parents? Like it becomes a mental health issue. And so for me, I absolutely used to be that person. And more so, I used to think that several mental health problems that I truly thought that I had just turned out to be just like stress about money.
Wow.
And I think, 100%. Wow.
What a cool thing to pass to people. Cause I feel like that, I'm sure that applies to way more people than even realize it.
Oh, 1,000%. And I do feel like, I don't want to get too like prescriptive about it, because I want to be clear that yes, there's a lot of mental health issues that are totally unrelated to money. Some of them are completely sort of biological and endemic, or they really take place within the brain. Some of them are trauma related, and it is not to say that money will solve all mental health problems, because it won't. However, and again, there's a ton of great sociological data on this. The degree to which your life becomes better on every possible metric, you have more time, you have a higher sense of control, you have more options, you have more discretion, you have the ability to prioritize yourself, to have hobbies, to sleep well, to outsource things you don't want to do. A huge amount of people who are currently in really bad mental health states, it may not be totally solved, but would be radically improved with simply more money, which is why all of that stuff about, money not buying happiness or whatever, really, really bothers me, because it absolutely does in a lot of very literal ways.
I absolutely agree. I'm so glad you say that. When people say, it's like, are you kidding me? If I didn't have money to buy myself the therapy that I needed in my past, I would not have been able to overcome the things I needed to overcome in order to find happiness. I mean, it's 100%. So something else that I really like about TFD is sort of the nuance that you go into in regards to spending and self-care, and how they might, you related, how they might differ. Have you ever conflated the two? Can you give sort of a personal example when spending might be self-care and when maybe it's not? Because I think they get conflated so often. And ought to be separated.
Yeah. So self-care is one of my least favorite expressions, just because I think it's been made completely meaningless. And often a lot of the things that we'll see talked about as self-care, are really just self-indulgences, which I don't think should be a bad term. Like, we're allowed to indulge ourselves. Like, I want to go for a massage. I want to watch, binge watch a Netflix show. I want to, have a glass of wine. I want to have a piece of chocolate cake. Like, sure, fine, do them, but they're all indulgences. And although they may be in a short term, making you feel relieved or, cared for in that sense, they're not really caring for yourself on any kind of longer term. Like, ultimately, caring for yourself comes down to making your life easier, more efficient, more adapted to your needs, and more livable in a longer term sustainable way. And the things that really care for ourselves in a sort of ongoing sense don't feel great in the moment. It's things like eating a bunch of vegetables when you really want to eat a bag of chips, or it's, working out regularly, or it's doing, your monthly budget review, and like all of these things that don't give you that immediate hit of pleasure, but are truly caring for yourself. They're making your life better in a long-term way. And they're really also caring for yourself the way a parent cares for a child, And how does a parent do that? Like, they make sure that they're taken care of. They make sure that their needs are met. They make sure that they have clothes to wear and food to eat and all of these things that are not indulgences. So I do think reframing it in your mind is like, what can I do today that I'll be so grateful I did a year from now, or a month from now, or 10 years from now, is the better way to look at caring for yourself. And when it comes to shopping, and consumerism, I mean, you can't tell right now, but I definitely love, I'm all about, I love clothes. I love, going to the hair salon. I love getting a facial or whatever. And I totally get a lot of different benefits out of them. I do think like anything that goes towards this sort of self-confidence quotient usually pays a lot of dividends. However, I'm also very aware in all of those things that they're A, indulgences, and they're B, ultimately optional and discretionary. And I think that we often, especially as women, have a tendency to recode things that we're buying because they feel nice to buy and they're fun and we want them as like I deserve this, or like, I'm really, this is important for me to have in some way. And I think it's important to say, no, these are optional. And it's not really a question of deserving or not deserving. It's a question of, is it in my budget or not? And will I get use out of it or not? And understanding that that's okay. And when it comes to making the decision to buy something or not, for me, the number one metric is just cost per use. Whatever, like if you spend a bunch of money on a pair of shoes, but you wear them 5 seasons and get them resold twice, like that's a better deal than, getting a cheap pair of shoes. But you have to be really conscientious about a cost per use. Like I just got a really nice bike. And I have a little like Excel sheet where I actually track the cost per use until I can get it down to like below $1, because I don't want to let myself be like, oh, this will be great for me. It's great for my body. It's a good investment. Like I want to hold myself to actually making it a good investment.
Okay. Oh my God. I have spreadsheets for my clothing, for every item of clothing that I own. And then I keep tabs on how often I wear them. Do you think sometimes I'm like, okay, this looks like a crazy person. Like I look like some sort of mad scientist, but it's literally just like black turtleneck, 26, like whatever, however many times I've worn it. Do you think that there's something obsessive about this? Because I think I'm like, this looks like rampant OCD if I'm just like looking at my spreadsheet, if I'm looking at my spreadsheets.
Girl, well, first of all, soul sister. But second of all, I could literally pull up. So I'm traveling tomorrow. My husband is living out of the country. Unfortunately, right now, it's been a nightmare.
Wow.
But yeah, that's a whole ground. He's been out of the country for the past year. So I have to go back and forth to France a lot to see him. And it is here for those watching on video. We have probably a good 50 pages worth of documentation that I have to bring to get my dog and I over there. And I also am packing for 6 weeks in a carry-on and a duffel bag. And when I tell you that if I did not have 15 freaking Excel sheets going down to the minute about like what I have to do on which day, like I literally just 5 minutes before this call rushed into the apartment after doing like my last errand I have to check off before I leave tomorrow. But I will tell you, and I hope you can relate to this because I really feel like it's so true and not enough people embrace it. Like it may seem excessive and it may seem obsessive. Like I have so many sheets to get me ready. But when I tell you that when my ass is sitting in the airport lounge, having like a glass of champagne or whatever, I will feel the true peace that you only feel when you know that you have done every last thing and you have accounted for it and you know where everything went. And you can truly relax because I really parent myself and I feel like I take care of myself in a way that like I am just prepared. And so I think about these things proactively so I never have to worry about them.
Yes. I so deeply relate. Like every fiber of my being relates. I'm also curious, I have to just go on a little tangent here, but I'm curious if you have a spreadsheet for what you pack so that you can do the 6 weeks you do?
Girl, wait, I literally have them right here. So hold on. This is like, this is my packing. It's like ready to go. I have my outfit hung up for going to the airport. So we're looking at my spreadsheet. This is the week before I leave.
Yes.
And this is my, like, I even have like, what's the weather like? I just haven't done my outfit combinations, but that's the last step. So trust me.
I am dying. I recently traveled. My partner lives his family's from Alaska. So we went to Alaska to get the vaccine and we were there for a month and I had so many spreadsheets for what to pack, how I can, because I also only packed a carry-on and a backpack for 4 weeks in Alaska. Like I would literally wore like 6 things so that I was like packing, so that I'm wearing extra outfits on the plane.
Yes.
I haven't come across somebody who does this. So this is really helping me to feel seen and heard.
You are very seen, let me tell you. And it was funny too, because like someone was like, you wear a blazer on the plane. I'm like, I often wear a blazer and a coat over it because those things take up a lot of space in my luggage.
Yes. Always the biggest shoe has to be worn, of course.
Yes.
Have you ever done a no buy, low buy month, year, week, anything like that? What's your stance on the no buy, low buys?
I mean, I've done one I feel like we all did one in the pandemic, like involuntarily, essentially. Yes. I've never done a 30-day challenge. I like that particularly. I've done ones where I will no buy a specific category of item. Like I did one with no clothes. And actually I doubled up the challenge where I did no new clothes, and you can only wear outfit combinations that you've never assembled before. So like it's all your clothes, but you've never put them together in that combination as like a way to sort of like refresh and get a, you know, a different perspective on your wardrobe instead of always redounding to the same 5 things. And, you know, with that, I feel like most people who do it, I think, have the same experience, which is just that like it teaches you that you really don't need as much as you think that you need. And for as many purchases as you make, very few of them actually are worth it in the long term or make you happy in the long term. Most of them are just about the immediate experience of buying something.
Absolutely. Do you consider yourself a minimalist?
No, I hate that word. I'm sorry. Listen, prior to this interview, I watched your interview with the minimalist. So no hate to those guys. They seem great. Well, I mean, you got a tiny glimpse at my apartment. Decoration wise, I'm definitely a maximalist. I'm very like into, you know, colors and textures and all of that kind of stuff. For me, minimalism as a concept is ultimately like, it's just like another thing wealthy people can do, right? Like, because I wrote an article about this years ago for The Guardian that like was really a fly strip for every minimalist on the internet to come yell at me. But I basically, the argument I made was that like anyone who's poor is like already a minimalist, but because like aesthetically their choices are not like the right choices, they don't get coded that way. You know, like growing up poor, like we could only afford to get new things like once a year. Like that's pretty damn minimalist, but that's not how that's coded. That's not how that's perceived. And I understand minimalism as both an aesthetic and a philosophical response to a world that is obsessed with consumerism. But I also think it's important to consider that the goal shouldn't be, I think, to pursue any one mode of living or one mode of shopping or one aesthetic goal. The goal should be to make sure that whatever it is that your life looks like, maybe you are a person who has a fairly large wardrobe rather than a capsule wardrobe, or like me, you have way too many pillows, or like you have a lot of things that you don't need. What you're focused on is, are all of those things meaningful to me? Do they enrich my life in some way? And do I consider them worth it on a cost per use level? I think that's the way to focus on it. And I think the minimalism trend, for whatever it's worth, I think is pretty much on its way out now. But I do think that there's a very specific way that we coded, at least at its height, we coded that particular philosophical and aesthetic pursuit that I think to me had a little bit of class undertones that I didn't love, you know?
Wow. Do you think there's a new movement that's happening that's kind of replacing minimalism?
You know, I think about that a lot, actually, because, you know, I think there's a turn towards things like sustainability, right? There's a turn towards, you know, fast fashion is something that people are like, clearly that's not a great way to operate. Like, you know, I think we're starting to realize that we were, you know, accumulating a lot of things that were not necessarily serving us. But I think, if anything, the word that I think would replace minimalism in that specific way of rethinking your relationship to money and to purchases is something like, you know, intentional, you know, it's mindfulness. And that can look like anything. And I think, you know, obviously like any, you know, digital or otherwise content, like what is most extreme is going to trend. It's going to be the representative. So like, at its heyday, you know, the minimalism movement was really kind of typified by like the very neutral on neutral, the like you have like one, you know, sofa with like, you know, no pillows and like a really uncomfortable looking chair and like one low coffee table.
Hammock. Yeah, totally.
A hammock. I know a hammock sleeper. They're a couple. They sleep in a hammock. I'm endlessly.
How does that work?
Trust me. I don't know her well enough to be like, how do you have sex? But anyway, suffice to say, like, I can't understand that life, but it was that very specific look that I think, and also a very specific perception of purity. And I'm not to go too much on the tangent, but it was also a very white movement. It was very heavily masculine in a lot of ways. It was very like, most of the people who were representing it were very thin, you know, and, you know, could afford to only buy like really, really high quality canvas colored, linen clothes and things like that. And that I think is what is particularly on the way out, because I think most people realize that it's just an aesthetic choice. And it's ultimately like, to have consumer choices in the first place is a privilege and a luxury. Most people don't have that choice.
It's interesting too hearing you say this, because the term sort of like intentionality or whatever term they're going to call, they'll find some sort of, ringy, trendy, zeitgeisty word for it, I'm sure. But that does seem more, with something like minimalism, it seems like it can be easy to take it too far, or to get hung up on, am I minimalist enough? Am I doing minimalism the right way? Whereas if it's intentionality, it's like that has with it some sort of individuality, it just seems more inherently kind of individual to me.
I agree. It's more adaptable. And I will also say, when it comes to things like whether it's fast fashion or processed foods or, plastic products, like all of these things that are heavily shamed in movements like minimalism and very much ostracized, like what do they boil down to? They boil down to that's things that are accessible to poor people, right? Like those are the kinds of consumer choices, like, or people who get really high on their horse about clean eating, great to clean eat, but I can't remember the exact number, but it's tens of millions of Americans live in a food desert where they can't even access fresh fruits and vegetables, So I think we have to also keep in mind that we have a real tendency to monitor and police and shame the spending habits of lower income people. And when you see that lower income people, like, yes, in many cases, they are buying fast fashion, or they do buy a lot of things that could be coded as unnecessary. But I can speak from experience and say that when you experience financial insecurity, not only are you going to buy what's available to you, but buying things is often your only means of, exerting any kind of choice, or to enjoy yourself, or to have that relationship to money. Like, you don't get the luxury of longer term planning. You don't get the luxury of investing in quality things. So the class aspect of it, as you can see, it really takes me somewhere.
I was going to say, your passion really comes through when talking about this. I'm assuming that comes from your upbringing, or where does this passion come from? For me, it's ultimately, it's not to like take a hard left turn into politics, but so I believe very fundamentally that money and personal finance are political. And I believe that if we don't have a class-based analysis of how we talk to each other and how we understand each other and how we work together, that we're doomed as a society. And I feel that we've gotten, I think, luckily, and not luckily because it's the result of a lot of hard work, but we've gotten much more lucid, I think, about gender issues, about sexuality, about, racial issues. But I think there's still an enormous gap in understanding when it comes to class. And I think the majority of that is because people leading the discourse, people on TV, people in magazines, people like us having this podcast, like most of us are financially comfortable or above. We're not really aware of how most Americans live. Over half of Americans could not afford an unexpected $500 emergency. And I think when we start to analyze things in that context, we realize that a lot of the way we talk to each other and the advice that we give or the things that we shame are just completely beyond the realm of understanding for people. Again, to go back to the fast fashion example, if we ever post something on TFD that includes a fast fashion element, there will be scores of people like, how could you? Fast fashion is terrible. And we do try to avoid it for, if nothing else, ecological and human rights reasons. But I think it's also important to understand that for probably the majority of Americans, that is all you can afford to buy. Do you speak about this? Like, do you do public speaking events and things like this? I'm just sitting here like, yes.
You're so sweet. No, well, obviously we have the YouTube channel, we have our podcast,
right,
which you should do. And we have, we do a lot of events. So yes, we do. But also, more importantly, like our big push on TFD, like I represent fewer and fewer of, or less and less of the overall sort of voice of TFD. Like it's, very, a huge diversity of experiences in our staff and in our contributors, and in our, featured creators. Because ultimately, my experience, yes, I did go through financial instability and I had a very messed up relationship to money, but I am now a financially secure, professionally secure 32-year-old married white woman. Like, my experience is not going to speak to the experience of most American women. So I want to make sure that I'm spending more time like bringing other people on to speak to these things, than to always sort of default to me being the face of it, for sure.
That's fantastic. I totally get that. It's great that you've diversified so much with your staff and brought on so many other people. I would love to just kind of wrap up here with kind of going into your writing career, because that's super interesting to me. And I want to know where you're at with it now. And if this is still something, is it more just TFDs taking, I'm assuming, every ounce of energy you've got, or are there still kind of other things that you're interested in writing? And if so, what?
My number one goal, honestly, because I like basically only write emails now. I mean, I do write YouTube scripts a fair amount, but I don't write very much anymore. Okay. And I do miss it. So my goal is when I don't know how TFD is like going to conclude. I mean, hopefully eventually I'll be able to pass it to someone else in some capacity, more able hands than mine. Like some 23-year-old TikToker who's like much more in touch with the culture than I am. But I would definitely love to, my next goal career-wise is I would love to write romance novels, because that's horrible. I love reading them. I think they're so fun. It's like all I can read in the pandemic is just like really fluffy stories that require no brain cells. So I would really like to write some because I think they're really fun, and I'd like to get back into writing just for fun and fiction.
Romance novels. Oh my God. Wait, which ones are you reading? Are these, I don't know any. So.
Oh my God, girl, you have to get it. I swear to God, I didn't used to. I used to be like, romance novels. Isn't that what really, undersexed suburban women read? Like, I had a complete.
I was going to say horny grandmas.
Exactly. Horny grandmas. And there is a fair amount of that, but it is such a vibrant literary genre, and it's like all female, which is really cool. All the authors are women for the most part. And the audience is women. And there's so many, I'm in a couple of book clubs. And, it's just such a great community. It's also, I think, the most profitable literary genre. So it's like the one area of book publishing where you can still make a couple dollars. But so in terms of, if you're going to just dip your toe into the genre, which I think you should, my favorite one that I read in the past year, and I've only been reading them for 2 years, is a book called, I cannot remember the title. You have to, someone listening to this will know and they'll put it in the comments, but it's basically about a woman who has an affair with a boy bander who's her daughter's favorite group. Okay. Very, very scandalous. Also one called The Kiss Quotient that is really, really cute. Those are two, Red, White, and Royal Blue. Obviously that was the massive hit last year. And it's very good. So, novels like that, and they're just fun. They're fun, flirty reads.
You just love reading them.
I do. They're fun. Listen, I cannot take I also like reading nonfiction and, serious novels and things like that. But in the pandemic, I can barely read an article. So I need something that's just pure enjoyment and fun to read.
And I understand now you're just writing emails, but before this time, did you ever try writing a romance novel?
No, but I wrote a lot of fiction before, just for myself. And I mean, I really do enjoy writing as an, it used to be my full-time job, and I really do like it. And I would like to go back to it. But I think, because it is such, publishing is the worst industry. Even there's 5 authors that make a lot of money and the rest of them barely make a living wage. So it's definitely something where if I were to go into it, it would just be about what would I truly enjoy the most? And that would probably be it, because it's just fun,
I think that's the ticket right there. What would I enjoy the most? I think that's a question we could all afford to ask ourselves more. I don't think it's asked 100%. Enough. Always what would fit, what would make sense? Where can I go from here? It's all this overanalyzing where I think it should just be what do I want to do? Literally what sounds good.
What sounds good? What about you? What are you going to do as your next step? What do you think?
I actually speaking of, I just sold a book and I just sent in my first draft.
About what?
It's a memoir, which I get it sounds like kind of insane being that I'm 28. But I do think I've lived a lot of life. I think I've lived kind of, a lot of major events that maybe people more toward the middle age who typically write memoirs have lived. And it's called I'm Glad My Mom Died. It's similar to, I had a one woman show by the same name, and it's kind of similar to those events, but just with it being a book, it covers a lot more material. It's a lot more, there's a lot more to it than there is in the 1 hour live show.
Wow. I'm really excited to read it. Yeah. I really enjoyed watching some of your interviews in preparation for this. I think it is very fascinating to see someone in your situation have like the level of self-awareness and sort of, empathy that you have. So hats off.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's nice. Chelsea, it's been a blast. It has been a blast.
It has been a damn hoot.
Yeah, this has been so fun. I've been looking so forward to talking to you since we had this on the books, and this has been even more fun than I expected it to be.
Me too. It's been a treat.
I'm so glad. All right, safe travels. Enjoy your trip.
Bye.
Bye.